Thank you very much for joining us this evening for this Green Minds talk on Plymouth's habitats. My name is Jess. I am with Devon Devon Biodiversity Record Centre. We work very closely with Devon Wildlife, who are one of the partners on the Green Minds project. So the Green Minds project has been running since early last year. It's a 3-year project. It's got funding, European funding, and it aims to put nature at the heart of decision making. So that is one part of the project, and to invest in nature-based solutions. It also means it's also a project that's trying to connect people with green spaces across Plymouth and look at our attitudes about how we think about nature and how we engage with it as well. So we have been running various events throughout the summer, and we will continue to do so. We have a number of partners in the project, including Plymouth City Council, Rio National Trust, and well, all the partners that you can see along the bottom of your screen there. If you have any questions this evening, please put them in the chat and we will have a look at them at the end of the talk. Thank you. So this is Plymouth. It's just a screenshot aerial here. As you can see, Plymouth is in such a fantastic position, sort of between the sea to the south, and then going up to the moorland it's got as well, not far away, further north. And Plymouth, although it's quite a large city, it has lots of fantastic green spaces within it. So some of those that I've picked out are Central Park. So that's 68 hectares. So it's a huge park for a centre of a city. It's designated as a park nearly 100 years ago. So it's got lots of mature trees and the layouts there. There's also Derriford Park, further in the north of the city, which is a sort of a group of different nature reserves, including Bircham Valley, Seaton and Border Valleys, and Poole Farm as well. And that covers about 146 hectares. So again, it's a really enormous space, and there's some fantastic places. Particularly, I think my favourite might be in the Bircham Valley. Then we've got Saltram, which is under National Trust ownership. And although slightly outside the city, it's a huge area. National Trust is a partner in the Green Minds project. It's over 200 acres that border the estuary. There's a number of different habitats within there. But it's quite an obvious one as you're coming into Plymouth that you can see. Got Efford Marsh just here. That's about 28 hectares, and it's got a variety of meadows and woodlands, but it's predominantly the marshland, and that drains into the River Plym. There's, well, Plymouth Sound, obviously here, but the shoreline that goes next to it, and right up in the northwest, there's Ernsettle Creek as well. So again, coming off the Tamar estuary. So there's lots of different habitats all scattered over Plymouth. Plymouth's got such a fantastic situation to have this variety of habitats. It's also got quite a few special and protected areas. So these include special areas of conservation. So that one of those is Plymouth Sound and Estuaries. And special areas of conservation are a European designation, and they've got a list of about 220 habitats and about 1,000 species, which are considered to be of European interest. So Plymouth has a special area of conservation. Also, the Estuaries Complex is a special protection area, another European designation, but that one is specifically for birds, and so protecting and safeguarding the habitats of migratory birds, and particularly threatened species. Moving on to a slightly more local level, excuse me, wrong button. Triple SIs, Sites of Special Scientific Interest. Plymouth has quite a few of these, and these are formal UK designated sites, so rather than European, but they're sort of national, and they are places that have been designated again for something really special, and they come under sort of specific management requirements for these sites as well. So the two that I've picked out are Plymouth, Sound, Shore and Cliffs. So that one's quite large, but then there are some really small ones as well. So for example, Plimbridge Lane and Estover Road triple SI is less than a hectare, not even half a hectare. And I think that one is designated for Plymouth pear. There's also local nature reserves. So there's quite a few of these across Plymouth, and they're designated by the local authority because they've got local importance. But that can also be for a variety of different habitats. So there are a number of these. They really are scattered across the city. And also county wildlife sites, which are a non-statutory designation. And that is something that Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, they kind of oversee the county wildlife network within the county. If you do want to find out more about where these are, you can, for example, look on Magic Map, which will show all the statutory ones. It's a DEFRA website, but you can look and see where they are. So you can, oh, there's my pointer here. You can see all the different colours, and they all stand for different designations. I think all these dots here are the local nature reserves. So there are quite a lot of them scattered across the city. So Plymouth, as we've seen, has got lots of different nature reserves and different areas. And what we're looking at this evening are some of the different habitats that you can find within them, and looking at how those habitats create a fantastic mosaic across the city, which really helps to increase the biodiversity. So there are grasslands, woodlands, obviously there's so much coast, and the marshes that go alongside with the estuary. And it's that mosaic and having the different types of habitats that makes Plymouth very special. We're going to talk a little bit about management of each of the sites and why they might need managing. And something that we are talking about quite a lot over the next, well, initially for the next month, but going on into the future, is also rewilding, and how you can do rewilding within a city, but how that does also need some management as well, because obviously we need to coexist, people and nature as well. So my first habitat is grasslands. And there are areas of grassland that can be found all across Plymouth. There are the large areas like we saw in the first map, so across Central Park and Derriford Park, and they're much smaller patches as well. Grasslands can, of all the habitats that we're going to talk about, they can form quite quickly comparative to a woodland, for example. And so they can quite quickly contribute to increasing biodiversity. They're fantastic for insect life. And so with a grassland, even if you don't have a lot of those wildflowers in there yet, even just the grasses, butterflies, particularly in the browns family, so meadow brown, gatekeeper, ringlet, ones like those, they need grasses to lay their eggs for their caterpillars. And so just having long tussocky grass can be really good for those butterflies. And then as a grassland matures and other flowers come in, like bird's foot trefoil or vetches, you get other butterflies like the blues, who like to feed on those types of plants. So here we've got a lovely kind of rough grassland. I think this might be in Derriford. So you can see it's all tussocky. There are a few stands here of what appears to be ragwort, which is a brilliant plant for insects. And even areas like this, so just really rough grass that's not managed, or so it looks unmanaged, is fantastic. So those tussocks provide brilliant like shelter for insects as well. And then you can also get, this is a beautiful photo of a wonderful meadow in Bircham Valley, which was absolutely teeming with insect life this summer, where it's got the knapweed there, as well as a variety of grasses. You can see some bird's foot trefoil, little yellow patches as well. But they do sometimes take a bit of time, but they're really important. So species-rich grasslands have declined massively over the last century. I think up to about 90% of them have been lost, and that's that unimproved grassland. And what we mean when we say unimproved grassland is grassland that hasn't been massively fertilized. So when grassland has been fertilized, so in much of agriculture that sort of improves it, so that's where it gets its name from. That may be good in terms of getting the grass growing, but it's really bad for the other species that want to grow in there. So wildflowers prefer low nutrient levels. So that's why this, unimproved grassland only makes up a tiny fraction of the grassland that we have nationally. It's something that can be reseeded, but it takes a very long time to get back to that initial state. But what you can do is purely in the management, you can slowly reclaim and remove some of those nutrient levels in the soil. So rather than reseeding, which can be very, very time consuming, it can be quite expensive and take a lot of work because traditionally it requires taking off all the topsoil. You can just change the management, and mow less frequently is one really good way. And when you do mow, so a last cut in say March or so, and then another cut not until very late summer or autumn, and then taking away those cuttings so that those nutrients from the cut grass don't go back into the soil, will over time help to reduce the nutrient levels and help the wildflowers take hold and just lessen the sort of voracity of the grasses that live in there. That can, well, like I said, it can take some time, but even just in the first year of not cutting, getting those long grasses will encourage more butterflies and other insects to be in there. So it's even from the first summer, it can really change for the biodiversity. If you are planning on doing any reseeding, you can also do it in smaller patches. There are plants such as yellow rattle, red bartzy and eyebright. So this is eyebright, and those three species are called hemiparasitic. So they slightly parasitize grasses, and they take some of their nutrients, which suppresses the grass growth, and that means that more wildflowers can grow. So that's one way that you can manage grasslands to try and bring them back to a sort of more wildflower state. And it's amazing what can be sort of in the soil already waiting to grow. So with all the little valleys and things that you get in Plymouth, or some quite large valleys, many of them are still wooded, and that's probably because they were so steep. You can get some really thick, dense, mixed oak woodlands, and also some much more open beech woodland. And a great thing about having woodlands in a city is that they have a cooling effect. So they can help to bring down temperatures. We all know that cities kind of store the heat in all the concrete and the tarmac. So having woodlands can sort of help mitigate that slightly. So this is quite an open, kind of predominantly beech woodland on a slope in Bircham Valley. And then I can't remember where I took this photo, I'm afraid, but a slightly more denser woodland, but with some, you can see at the front here, some coppiced hazel, which is one of the important things when it comes to management. So there is coppicing, which is really good. I just mentioned that with hazel, and you can do it with other species as well. That just helps to keep the ground level, ground layer still quite thick. You can use the stems that you coppice, so it gives the woodland a working function. And if it's done on a proper rotation, it keeps the fruit and everything still very abundant. At times, I know we're all about planting trees, but at times you do need to also cut trees down, particularly in a city environment, in parks where people will walk frequently. And also, unfortunately, probably in the next few years, it might have to be done as well because of ash dieback, creating very unstable trees. However, if you do need to cut down trees or just as is the case in this picture, I think there's obviously been a cut just of a branch here. then leaving the deadwood, the branches in the woodland, so like these branches here, is absolutely ideal because they provide homes for so many different insects and beetles. So they'll be able to bore into that and so yeah, increase biodiversity hopefully. So here's a team who have been coppicing. Some of the photos throughout this presentation are from a previous project called Active Neighbourhoods that some of you may have known that finished in 2019. But it was all a project that focused around Plymouth. So we borrowed some of their photos for this evening's talk. Hedgerows. So these are sort of have some of the similarities with woodlands. But Devon hedges in particular are really important. They're really characteristic. So Devon hedges are traditionally built on a hedge bank. So they've got the hedge sitting on sometimes quite a large bank of earth. Sometimes it's been faced with stone, but it means that it's got that extra niche, that extra habitat for all sorts of animals to live in and where plants can grow as well. We've got one of the longest networks of hedges in the UK. All those tiny fields that we still have. Again, Devon's a very hilly place. And there are ancient hedgerows that are still present in Plymouth. And ancient hedgerows on these hedge banks can be hundreds of years old. And they are fantastic corridors for wildlife. So particularly within a city where they do exist, they can be really used for by animals and plants as well, to sort of travel and spread through an area, through a city. So they can be used by, obviously hedgehogs, dormice, various plants to be able to spread on them. So because we've got those hedge banks, we've got, so much area for those sort of hedgerow woodland species that we see to grow along the base. And obviously for insects as well, they're really important, giving them places to hibernate and pupate as well. So this is one of the hedges in Central Park. It's one of the ancient hedgerows that's been there for a really long time, that was part of the farm before it became a park. And this one's actually has been faced in stone. But another thing about this hedgerow or hedge banks that's really good is if you have two hedges next to each other, like you get along a lane, then that area between them becomes its own little biome. So it can be really sheltered. Bats love foraging up and down like between these hedges, and they're really nice and sheltered for insects to use as well. But as this photo is a bit of an example of, they do need to be managed so that hedgerows can be kept thick. So for example, you might have a hedge that grows too much and it becomes really spindly, and so effectively rather than a hedge you get a row of trees. If they're still small and spindly, you can then lay that hedge and sort of regain that hedge structure. But if they become too big, then sometimes you just need to replant in between to thicken up the hedge. And the ground flora as well is really important. So I mentioned primroses before. Primroses are they're protected plant species, and the hedge banks that we get are perfect for them to grow on. This is a team of volunteers who are doing a bit of hedge laying. So this is a hedge that has obviously grown up way too much, but it's still, because it's still quite thin stems, you can lay that. So that's when you cut, I'm sure most people know what hedge laying is, but it's when you cut partially through a stem and you turn a vertical stem and you can turn it horizontal, but it can still grow. And so it just helps to thicken up the hedge again. Now, if your hedge is either newly planted or needs a little bit more help, maybe it's just not thick enough, you can also do dead hedging, which is a quick way to provide something that's quite similar to a hedge. So it provides some of the habitats and the functions that a hedge would, so it can still be used by, for example, commuting bats, And by that, you know, lots of bats really like to stick along known routes and stick along hedgerows. They don't always like to go out into open fields, depending on the species of bat. So having a good network of hedges really helps to, well, help them get around. And dead hedging is, obviously it's not going to be there forever, but it can really help to sort of fill in those gaps where there might be really gappy hedges or hedges that are just still regenerating. And obviously when they do regenerate, sometimes they do start off quite spindly, but this is fantastic. Bit of tree hedge planting going on here a few years ago, part of the project. Verges, so I've kind of skipped back slightly to a type of grassland, and I nearly put it in earlier, but I thought that verges deserved its own category. So they are generally areas of grassland. So like hedges, they act as corridors for wildlife. So, you know, because they go along roads and they're kind of long, thin strips, but when they are left to grow long and to provide the habitats that a wildflower meadow would provide, but in just a smaller version, they can look a little bit messy, but the insects absolutely love them. And so that's how insects can get around a city as well. This is, I went out with the rebel botanists this summer, and so this is one of the verges that we looked at. It was absolutely buzzing with loads of bees and lots of things in there. This is right near the city centre. Much of this will die away over winter. It wasn't very grassy, but there's lots of different types of verges you can get. I'm sure you've all seen some of the verges around Plymouth that have been planted up with wildflowers as well, to help with nectar source, and they also, obviously, I think they look very pretty as well. So when it comes to management of verges, generally less is more. So rather than keeping everything completely mown as much as you can reduce that regime and maybe just mow a strip along the road or the pathway right next to it, so it's obviously safe and clear for people to use as well, but that will also provide habitat for insects and other animals that want to use it. Generally areas of low disturbance so that they have a chance to grow, and like I said, you do need to balance it with road safety, and so I think that does happen in Plymouth, where there's, you know, certain amounts of mowing done. This was part of the Active Neighbourhood project, and I think this was a meadow that they created to around some houses. But this is the sort of thing that you can achieve on verges, like really beautiful, fantastic nectar sources, and they're areas that may otherwise be unused. Got a couple more habitats to go. Having said, you know, that Plymouth is on the estuary, there's lots of different pockets of wetlands and marshlands. So in the past, you know, areas have been drained, and I'm talking about, you know, for many years, going back into history and across the whole of the country, people have been quite committed to draining wetlands. But we, I think we're slowly starting to realise that we need to put them back as well now. They can be really important for birds. So I mentioned that Plymouth has got the special protection area, which is for migratory birds and protecting, safeguarding those habitats. And there are little pockets of marshes and wetlands across Plymouth. So this is a wetland in the Forder Valley, this one. So it's actually quite far inland, but a really good stepping stone for birds that might be travelling elsewhere. Some open water and lots of rushes and reeds, plenty of places for birds to hide in. And then this is Efford Marsh. So there's a really nice little viewing platform there, which helps to kind of let people see what's there, but without actually having to disturb it by going in there themselves. So management, I mean, the first one seems pretty obvious. Got to keep them wet. And also to keep undisturbed areas so that birds can nest in them. So by sort of not letting your dogs leap in and jump everywhere will help support those nesting birds. There's also some management that you need to do. For example, this is parrot's feather, which is an invasive species, and it can take over wetlands. So because we're talking about habitats within a city, sometimes those habitats do need a bit of extra help because of species like this. And finally, we've got some coastal areas in Plymouth, of course. There's quite a few different stretches of coastal habitat around the city. They have very distinct plant assemblages. You get lots of birds on them. This is, it's this position of Plymouth with the coast and having all the countryside surrounding it that gives it such a fantastic variety, and there's this mosaic of different habitats. But when it comes to management of the shoreline, there's not a huge amount that sort of we as individuals can do to sort of help in the management of coastlines, but we can help to protect it. So minimizing disturbance, and by that I mean disturbance of, for example, some of the wildlife that's on there. So if there are birds, or if I understand that there is a friendly seal that hangs out around Plymouth, but if there's any other wildlife out there that may not want to be disturbed, then sort of keeping a respectful distance can be good. And also not leaving plastics or anything on the beach. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. If you're anything like me, it's not just take away everything that you bring, but probably take home more than you bring. And there are projects running in the area like preventing plastic pollution that you might want to look at. Here are some kids exploring the beach as well. Obviously there's a certain amount of disturbance that is absolutely fine, and it's great to see kids exploring and getting to know what's there, because it's such a brilliant habitat that Plymouth has on its doorstep. So I talked a bit just then about what we can do as individuals, and obviously there's a few things you can take part in. Some of the Green Minds events. We've run various things this summer, from well, speaking from my own experience, teaching people how to survey grasslands and different habitats. But there's so many different events that we've been putting on. I'm going to talk about a couple that are coming up in a moment. You could create your own mini meadow to help be a little island and help with the sort of corridors across the city. And be part of the urban rewilding efforts, which is something that we're really going to be talking about over the next few weeks. You can also record wildlife. So obviously I'm from Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, so recording wildlife is what we do, is what we manage. The Record Centre holds millions and millions of records from across the county, and we really encourage you to record your sightings of wildlife, and particularly places like within the city. It seems to be sometimes under-recorded what people see. So we do, if anyone is familiar with the iRecord app, we have an activity on there, Green Minds. So please do join that. That's a way that you can submit your records. I think we have some information about that on the website as well. So the Green Minds website is a really good resource for information. We put on our previous talks there. So for example, there's one, the Rewilding Network Social. The slides from that are up on the website. So that might be something that you're interested in. We've got more Green Minds events coming up. Plymouth City Council has got lots of information on their website, and Devon Wildlife Trust as well. So two of the talks that we've got coming up. So in a couple of weeks, we've got How to Rewild, a Q&A with Devon Wildlife Trust. These are all booked via Eventbrite, so you can have a look. Well, obviously you know how to do that because you booked onto here. But that's one that I believe you can submit your questions beforehand, so you can discuss them at the event. And a week later, there's rewilding in your community. But we also have an in-person event coming up. So again, in a couple of weeks, shore search training at Wembury. And so that is a fantastic opportunity. So with Devon Wildlife Trust, Wembury Marine Centre, to help train you so you can take part in a national citizen science survey. So thank you very much for coming this evening. I haven't been able to see any of the chat, so I will rejoin it in just a moment and see if we've got some questions. But if you do have any questions, please do pop them on there, and I will try and answer them. You can follow Green Minds as well, and those are the addresses to look for. Right, so if you bear with me a moment, I will stop sharing and let's see. I'm sorry, it may have automatically turned my camera off then, and I might not have noticed. So I've been talking to you, but I don't know if you've been able to see me. Let's see, have we had any questions?
So
I've had one.
Yeah. Haven't yet in the chat.
There's been one that's been sent to me rather than everybody. So would leaving ash dieback deadwood help or hinder? Ash dieback isn't my area of expertise, but what I understand is that if a tree has ash dieback, then it's actually, while it's alive, it almost helps to spread it by producing extra seeds and leaves that then blow and take the fungus away with it. I don't know how long it survives on deadwood, but it is here, and I think it's here to kind of stay for a while. So I'm not sure on the policy of leaving ash dieback wood. I'll have to look into that actually, but it's a very interesting question. Thank you. No questions.
I was wondering, Jess, I was thinking at the start when you were talking about, you know, the protected sites and all the various, you know, things in Plymouth. Is it unusual for a city to have so many different protections, or is it quite a standard thing? And sort of how does Plymouth compare with other cities in the UK?
Oh, well, being Devon based, I'm not massively aware of what every other city is. But on that Magic Map website, that's national. And I should think that Plymouth probably is actually pretty good because of its location. So having the estuary will give it the special protected area. So for birds, that's generally for places that usually do have quite marshy areas, because they're the really key areas for migrating birds. But I've never actually compared this between cities. I know Exeter has some protected areas as well, but it's kind of in a similar position with the estuary and surrounded by countryside as well. Sorry, Hayley.
No, it's all good. And Alan has just asked about removing grass cuttings from meadows. So Alan, I'll pop a link in the chat as well, which shows, which has a link to how meadows and verges are managed in Plymouth. But Jess, what's sort of the advantage of taking sort of cuttings away, or, you know, leaving them and things like that? Does it make much difference?
It depends on what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to turn an area, so, you know, we see so many green fields, well, across the whole country, but often in Devon, and they're amazing and fantastic and vivid green. Those, when it comes to insects, can be actually really, really poor because they are such a monoculture. And so if you wanted to try and turn that into, or something like that, into a more wildflower meadow, then it would be really, really important to remove the cuttings to reduce the fertility of the soil, because that bright green colour shows that it's probably had fertiliser put on and it's very, very fertile. And if you tried planting wildflower seeds in there, chances are the grass would just overtake them, and they wouldn't be able to grow. Whereas if you are managing a wildflower meadow, it's still good practice, I think, to remove cuttings to keep the nutrient levels low. But if you've already got really good species, then if you miss a year, they're still going to come back. So I hope that's okay. Someone said, can you repeat the links where we can join in with the Green Minds project? Oh, there we go. Hayley, you've put some links in the chat there about that. If you Google Green Minds Project Plymouth or Green Minds Plymouth, we'll have our website, and that has loads and loads of information on there as well. It's also got information on how to ID different species. If you did want to go and have a look and do some recording on iRecord, there's some information on there with links and helpful tips. I've had another message as well, a question here. Can you rewild with short grass and flowers such as clover, creeping buttercup, self-heal, etc.? So is that, Helen, is that what you've got already and you want to rewild it from that or to that? Because, so
are you
clover.
allowed to talk?
Oh yes, hello Helen.
Yeah, I just worked it out. Basically, okay, my garden is for my dogs. Therefore, because I live on an estate, I cannot let the grass grow so long that I can't find where they've gone to the toilet. Yes. So I tend to keep it. It's not short, it's at the highest mower height. So there's, tufts everywhere, but it is fairly short. And I've been adding plants such as creeping buttercup, clover, self-heal, and several of the other things that can manage being mowed every now and again. Yeah. And I'm kind of, when you were saying about rewilding and about for the insects and the long grasses and everything, I was just a bit worried whether you can still do it with shorter grass and wildflowers.
Yeah. So Helen, I think that you have absolutely epitomised the issues that we sometimes have with rewilding and having to share that space as well. So I would say that sometimes we need to compromise. So obviously having keeping it shortish, but having those flowers in there, the ones that you listed to me, so clovers, some buttercups, self-heal, those are plants that do quite well at being cut every now and again. Their flowers constantly come back, and clover is brilliant nectar source. If you've been out even to like just a local park where they've got clover, so the park over the road from me, I'm actually based in Exeter, but I went to the local playground, and it was only about this high, this deep, all the grass and the clover, but there was a bee every metre. Those flowers are really nectar rich. So even if you can't let it grow, knee, waist height, then keeping those flowers will be a fantastic nectar source for insects. So you're doing a really good job. Keeping it long and keeping it long sort of late would encourage other species to grow, but particularly, if it's used a lot and it's your garden, and then it sounds like you're doing the best that you can do with that space, which is great.
Yeah, I've just added a hedge of typical English plants as well. Well, not a hedge. It's a few plants that will eventually turn into a hedge. And then I can add things like primroses and such like to it as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, we do. So one of the talks that's coming up is that the rewilding Q&A that we've got on the 7th of October. So that, I think you can book on Eventbrite, and I believe that's one that you can submit questions to as well. So if you've got any questions like Helen just had there, it's one of my colleagues who's really experienced, and he will hopefully be able to answer your questions then as well, which is going to be specifically about rewilding. Do we have any other questions?
I was wondering, Jess, obviously living in the city, there are quite a few flats, or people might have smaller gardens. What's sort of a good way to attract wildlife, even if you have a small space, or maybe like a balcony or windowsill? What's sort of a good way to attract more wildlife?
Yeah, you can still provide. Well, it's probably going to be for insects, because you're not going to want your balcony overrun with small mammals, I suspect. But even just having plant pots or a window pot or something that's potted up with preferably like native species. So I've seen people have pots of bird's foot trefoil, which is a great species, and then of course you can just move them away when they die back and bring them back, and we'll see they're super hardy and will come back again. And it's species like that will be really good even in small spaces. So one thing that Green Minds is looking at across the duration of the project is this rewilding and urban wildlife corridors. So as well as sort of larger corridors that can be made, we can all do our own bit by creating almost like little stepping stones as well. And the more people that do that, then obviously it may only be small, but if enough people do it, then in combination it can really make a difference. So even small areas, even like leave a tiny little corner of your garden, or a window sill or balcony, anything like that.
Alan has just asked a very good question. Are there species that once existed in much less urban Plymouth that have disappeared, but which could be reintroduced?
I expect there's probably quite a few. There's one species actually that, as part of a different project, so not Green Minds, but in another project I've been working on with Devon Wildlife Trust, that we've been looking for across all of Devon, which is brown hairstreak butterfly. Now we know Devon Biodiversity Record Centre and Butterfly Conservation have been working on it, and we know that they were in Plymouth, but I think the nearest record is still outside the city and is still about 50 years old, and the records that we have for actually inside urban Plymouth is I think it's going on a lot longer than that, but that is a species that lives its adult life as a butterfly on ash trees, and then it needs really good blackthorn hedges to lay its eggs and caterpillars. And that's just, sorry, it's the first one that came to mind. But that would be interesting. Obviously, we're looking at it in the context of ash dieback. Obviously, with them, we're wondering if the hairstreaks would decline as well. But there are probably quite a few species like that would once have been around a sort of more open Plymouth city. So, for example, Central Park, obviously we know it's central, but it was once a farm. And the fields of that would probably have had dormice in it as well. And there's lots of things that have not just declined within Plymouth and cities, but have declined across Devon and across the country as well over the last however many years. It'd be interesting to know what could be brought back. I think what we should probably focus on at the moment is preserving what we have and helping that to spread across the city, and making sure that we do provide good habitats for those birds and insects and small mammals that we do have, or even larger mammals, and the amphibians and reptiles as well, which also love hedgerows. I forgot to mention them. Thanks, Alan. Really good question.
Hearing you talk about butterflies actually reminded me. Do you want to say a little bit about the white letter hairstreak? Because that's probably quite a hidden species.
I would love to. Yes. So yeah, with hairstreaks, I thought of it as well as I was talking about the brown hairstreaks. But something that is actually even rarer, particularly in Devon, is a butterfly called the white letter hairstreak, and they're really quite small, and they live on elm trees. So white letter hairstreaks probably went through something that the brown hairstreaks have yet to have, really, which is when Dutch elm disease came into the UK. It's a good few decades ago now, and it took out quite a lot of our, well, most of our elm trees, and that would have really affected this butterfly, because it really does live its entire life on elm, and they are known for basically not really moving very far. So they will spend their adult life around the elm tree. They'll sometimes come down and feed on other plant species. So I think that creeping thistle, I think, is one that they quite like, and I think they've been around the cotoneaster plants as well within Central Park. But yes, Central Park has a population of white letter hairstreaks. We've done a couple of surveys there already this year, and I think we are maybe going to do another survey looking for eggs this autumn, and we might do another thing in spring. So do keep an eye out for those surveys as well. So they lay their eggs on the tree, and then those eggs stay there on the tree over winter, and then they hatch out in spring, and they start eating the elm leaves, and they eat them in a really distinctive way. So you can go and have a look for the leaves, and they've been cut in certain ways, so it's really characteristic of the caterpillar. And then they pupate and obviously spend the summer as an adult before the whole cycle again. But they really are very loyal to their tree. I mean, we're not just talking elms, we're talking one elm tree that one population will like to be on. So what we're trying to see in Central Park is how our population is doing, and if it is spreading, because they do spread eventually. But that's a really interesting species that we've been looking at as part of the Green Minds project. Let's see, we've got a few more minutes if anyone has anything else they'd like to ask. Let's see.
And while we're waiting for more questions to come in, Jess, what's been your favourite species or sort of discovery you've made while you've been doing surveys in Plymouth?
Favourite discovery? I think it's actually, I've lived in Devon a very long time, and at the moment I live in Exeter, and I didn't know Plymouth very well when I started this project. And when I went to go and do my first few surveys, I was absolutely blown away actually by some of the fantastic habitats that you've got right in the city centre. It's been a really long time since I've been to Plymouth. So from Central Park, there are some great fields there, and we've done butterfly surveys there and got, I think we had a dozen species. We had a moth survey in Central Park recently as well. And I think I already mentioned that I think Lower Bircham Valley, or Bircham Valley, is probably my favourite place. I've done surveys there and I've hardly met any people. People need to go there more. It's beautiful. But yes, I think, did I see something pop up there for another question? Or was that?
Yes, we do. So Caroline has asked, I read that in parts of the US and Canada, red bartsia is considered an alien invasive weed and they are trying to get rid of it. In the UK, it's part of the wildflower mix and to be encouraged. Do you know the reason for the different perspectives?
It is like so many different species. Once they get to a different country, different part of the world, and it's somewhere where they can absolutely flourish. So, for example, we are really worried about our hedgehogs here. If you go to New Zealand, they're a pest that are wiping out their they're ground nesting birds. So species that travel to a different part of the world that they've never been to before, and they absolutely thrive. We've got lots of invasive species here. Some of them are absolutely fine. Others, yeah, might be sort of harder to control because they've just found themselves in a fantastic new climate. So that's probably part of it. So if red barksia is a European species, but it's got over there, and it might be maybe parasitizing some of their rare grasses, they're not going to be particularly happy with that. Whereas for us here, it's, you know, red barksia is part of our native flora, and it's a really, really good one to have for those reasons of, you know, it being able to suppress some of the grass growth and allow other species to come through. It's probably gone now, but there's lots of red barksia that you can find in Central Park and around Derriford as well, if you ever wanted to go and look and find some. So yes, different perspectives depending on yeah, if it's part of the native flora or not.
Thanks, Jess. And Caroline has also asked, are there scrublands around Plymouth that could be used as a rewilding project?
There might be some. I think that part of the Green Minds project is to identify areas where maybe some rewilding efforts can take place. So that is something that I think is on our very imminent next phase of what we're going to be doing, to be able to replant up some areas and look at how we can create, you know, small patches of rewilding to create those urban wildlife corridors that will allow nature to kind of move through Plymouth as well. So the answer is yes. I don't know exactly where they all are at the moment, but it's something that we're looking at for those reasons.
I think we've got time for one more question, and it's a good one. It's about looking to the future. So Alan has asked, looking into the future, how do you see climate change impacting on the flora and fauna of Plymouth?
Wow, that's a big question. So we're expecting things to warm up and have really hot summers and wet winters. I think is well, it seems to change, but we're certainly going to be seeing some changes in the climate. There are going to be impacts. Generally, I think that some of it is one of the reasons it gives Plymouth this fantastic diversity of habitats is its location, so being right on the coast. But it does also mean that it's kind of sandwiched between the sort of moorlands higher, well, off to the east slightly, and the sea. So things in Plymouth aren't necessarily going to have a huge area in which they could expand. So we might see some changes there. It's quite difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen and what species might be affected. But I think part of the Green Minds project in putting some of these like solutions and ideas into sort of how we think about almost the everyday processes that go on through the city, and thinking about nature as not just an add-on, but really the forefront of some of the decisions, will mean that hopefully we can get prepared and tackle some of the things that are likely to come. That sounds a slightly depressing note to end on, or positive one, depending on how you look at it. Brilliant. I think that will have to be our last question. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And please do check out the other events that we've got coming up. We're going to be sharing this recording on the Green Minds website. So if you wanted anyone else to be able to see it. Let's see. Oh yes, there's a few other points in the chat there that Hayley's just popped on, some useful links. So do check out. I think everything's on the Green Minds website, and all of the events are probably going to be on Eventbrite as well. So do have a look at them. Thank you very much for coming, including some familiar names that I can see there as well. So although I haven't seen you, thank you very much. And hope to see you at another event soon. Thanks. Have a good evening, everybody.